My grandfather was born in Holland on February 26, 1921. Due to a depression that swept throughout the Netherlands, the majority of his childhood was spent in abject poverty. He and other children in his neighborhood would spend days walking around in the sludge at the bottoms of canals, looking for anything of value so they could buy food for their family. His family was so poor, in fact, that the only bread they could afford was covered in mold. He was just a teenager when the Nazis came to power and started their conquest. He once told me that when Holland was occupied by the army, he and his brothers would sneak out in the middle of the night to cut down telephone poles so that the family would have wood for their wood stove. After Holland was liberated by the Allied forces, my grandfather emigrated to Canada, and while on the ship to the New World, he would meet the woman who would become his wife. They were married shortly after landing in Niagara Falls. My grandfather soon adopted his English name, Nick, and learned the ways of masonry. In time, he and his wife settled in a small town in southern Ontario to become parents, grandparents, and eventually great-grandparents. He loved Laurel and Hardy, and we often watched their adventures together. From struggling with house repairs to moving pianos and dealing with their wives. We often watched Stan and Ollie getting themselves into one fine mess after another. There were the Stooges and there were the Marx Brothers, but we always came back to Stan and Ollie, whom my grandfather affectionately dubbed the boys. I believe now that they were more than just entertainment to him. They were a sign of simpler times when innocence was not easily found in the world. I think my grandfather never had much of a childhood, but by watching Laurel and Hardy, he was able to experience the innocence he was deprived while growing up. And it was because of his love of these actors that I was introduced to them, and we spent countless hours watching them together. It was his sense of magic and wonder that filled my imagination, and to this day I feel very lucky because there's a very large part of me that's still in touch with my inner child. I never got a chance to tell him that. Spending time with my grandfather was one of the highlights of my childhood. It's possible that as we get older, the harsh realities of the world we live in become ever so more apparent. As a result, returning to that childlike innocence we once knew becomes more difficult, and yet some would say more necessary in order to keep balance in our lives. It's important for us to remember how to laugh when the world seems to be falling to pieces around us. Bhuban, this is for you.